A lot of guys my age are struggling with the idea of self-destruction. Suicide has reached a level of crisis in America, the scientific papers say, brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. The scientific papers cite factors like isolation and economic hardship. But that's just a fancy way of saying life hasn't worked out for some guys in my generation. Not the way we were trained to imagine our older selves when we were boys anyway. All of you, if you're struggling, you're worth something, you know. I wish I could have said that to my friend Mickey. My friend took his life last week. He wasn't the first friend to do that over this past year. He wasn't even the second. My friend's name was Mickey. Mickey's letter arrived at my home a few days after he ended it all. He wanted to explain things. He wanted to apologize. I'm sorry, the letter began. I will be discovered in the garage behind my car in the recycle bin for ease of removal. That really struck me. Mickey, always the urbane and cultured man, had literally thrown himself away for ease of removal. In the letter, Mickey detailed how he had exhausted his savings and was unable to find meaningful work after being dismissed from his job during the pandemic. Mickey had worked for 3 decades in international trade and logistics. Now, having reached the upper limits of middle age, the phone wasn't ringing anymore. He was broke, and the credit card companies were squeezing him. Combined with the significant loss of confidence and hope, I've given up, he wrote. This is not the position I expected to be in at this point in my life, and it is simply too much to continue. Mickey left just enough for the cremation. Please don't hang up, friend. Just a bit more. Mickey had no wife, no children, no live-in lover that I know of, but he had friends and family who loved him. Depression can make you blind, I suppose. And why didn't we see Mickey's depression? The grind of day-to-day difficulties tends to dull the senses, I suppose. So Mickey spent his last hours addressing envelopes and scratching out his own obituary. Imagine that, sitting by yourself, writing your own obituary. I suppose this is my attempt at his epigraph. That would read, Mickey was a decent and honest man. If you feel you're at the end of the rope, friend, or if you're considering a rope or a rubbish bin, please don't. Just call someone. That's all. Just call and talk. Start with that. Because if the meaning of life is to be found in one another, then without you, life will have less meaning for those you leave behind. So long, Mick. The world's a poorer place without you, but I am richer for having known you.
Live from downtown Detroit, it's the No Bullshit News Hour with my main man, Charlie LeDuff, and Karen Dumas.
It's just it, breaking news. No more bullshit. No more bullshit.
My dear friend Karen is off for the week. But let me remind you that if you're an entrepreneur looking for a safe and socially responsible real estate investment, consider contacting Archangel Senior Management. Senior living is one of the fastest growing markets in America, and Archangels offers small communal living for senior citizens in homes right inside our own neighborhoods. It's the antithesis to the cold corporate nursing homes we've all now heard so much about. The care is genuine, the owners are local, and Archangel has Overwatch. If interested in this trailblazing opportunity, contact Joe LeBlanc at Archangel at 989-614-0416. I want to remind you that while the politicians lie to you and the media lies to you, how do you know if your investment statements are lying to you? Remember, you're not managing your wealth. That's some unseen guy working for a big bank, jacking some unknown algorithm. Call Luke Nowacki at Pinnacle Wealth Strategies. You should know your money, man. He'll tailor a financial plan specifically for you, from annuities to retirement accounts to college savings. He'll keep you up to date and always a phone call away. Let Luke Nowacki worry so you don't have to. Luke Nowacki, 248-663-4748. And it's opening day next Friday. And I wouldn't go down to the ballpark and eat Illich's overpriced bullshit hot dogs. I would come to American Coney Island, the oldest family-owned restaurant in Detroit, and it being Friday, still Lent, you have these beautiful fish sandwiches. That is Pacific Pollock. As you all know, I worked on the boats and the canneries in Alaska. Pacific Pollock, flaky, delicious, hand-battered the very morning. Fresh lettuce, tomato, cheese, and a nice bun. American Coney Island at the corner of Lafayette and Michigan Avenue, or you can always get a Coney kit sent to your house. Just go to AmericanConeyIsland.com. Well, you know, when it rains, the power goes out. And when the power goes out, the internet goes out. When the internet goes out, I call my friend Matt and Bernie at XG Service Group. Look at Bernie here on his hands and knees, giving it everything he's got. Look at that man crack. So busy, he forgot to wear a belt. There's Matt right there getting the board together. That's 734-245-4100 if you need Matt and Bernie to come take care of your voice over internet, your security cameras, off-campus access control, Wi-Fi, and cameras for homes and business. They'll design it for you. You got restaurants, they do drive-through systems, railroad cameras for public safety, total wireless camera systems for your home and business. Yeah, that's right. Call XG Services at 734-245-4100. Now, speaking of suicide, let's talk about career suicide here. We got Michael Moynihan, one of my favorite guys all time in the media. You know him from the Free Press, his podcast, The Fifth Column, and probably most famously, you know him from Vice News on HBO. That guy was just tripping across the world doing real shit. What's up, Michael? How are you, brother?
How's it going, Charlie? Good to see you, man.
So the name of just real quick, I just wanted to bullshit with you, but you got something to pitch. It's the Moynihan Report. Want to explain what it is?
Yeah, no, it's a new show that I'm doing. Vice, obviously the wheels came off that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. And I wrote a long obit for that for the Free Press like last year. But yeah, rather than traipsing around the world and doing whatever the hell I wanted, now I'm in a studio in Brooklyn. And we're doing it twice a week at 4 p.m. live, and then you can see it, after when it's archived. But yeah, it's a show that's not just politics. I mean, the Fifth Column, which is a pretty popular podcast that I do, all about politics. This, speaking of depression, last episode we did yesterday was with Laura Delano, who has a new book out about how she was deeply, horribly depressed, and then took every pharmaceutical under the sun and managed to get off of them and thinks they're horrible. So we had her on to talk about it. And, we're just doing all sorts of different cool stuff. Actor Ethan Suplee is going to come on next week and talk about his transformation in life. So, yeah, we're doing all sorts of stuff, not just politics. But
now looking at
that too.
The trailer, Jason, our mutual friend from Vice, clipped up. You're also going to take this thing on the road, right? Like you're in Poland looking at the fence. Yeah, that's unique.
Yeah,
that's totally unique.
So that's the thing that we're trying to do, is that it's unfortunately, as you know, Charlie, being a longtime journalist, journalism is really expensive, and we're trying to find ways to get out there and actually do the reporting like the stuff that I used to do at Vice. So Jason and I went to Poland, and we did 2 pieces while we were there. One of which was about immigration. Donald Trump saying build a wall and send the military down to the border. That's what the Poles did. And so we went out to the border with Belarus, where the dictator of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, was sending migrants across the border to sort of try to destabilize Western Europe. And so they responded by building an enormous wall and sending the military out there. And a couple of the Polish guys have been killed out there too, one by a migrant last year. So it's a pretty interesting story, particularly in Poland, that has they don't have an immigration issue that sort of Germany does or Sweden does.
Exactly.
So we went out and did that. It's like completely fascinating.
So, I mean, that's kind of, the podcasts and everything. The show's unique in this way too. You're on two-way. I had to look that up. So it's two ways. an app?
It's a it's just a platform that's on YouTube and going to be expanding to other things too. But the kind of flagship show there was Mark Halperin. You might remember him, the political journalist. He wrote Game Change, which I guess was probably one of the biggest political books of the 2000s, which was about the McCain-Obama campaign, became an HBO series too. But he does a show twice a day live, and he does it with Sean Spicer, who was Trump's press secretary on the right, and Dan Turrentine on the left. And they just have people on. They have like strangely civilized conversations, and all of Mark's pals in the political world come on and look, Mark broke the news that Biden was dropping out. Like, he's still a reporter, so he does that stuff every day, and that was becoming popular. And the platform decided to expand, so I hopped on board. And the part of the show is that at the end of the show it's like an old drive time radio show. You take calls from people. And it's just,
and they pop in like Zoom. They pop in like Zoom.
Basically, yeah.
And so you did the first one, and
we've done two now. Yeah, the first one was with Anthony Weiner.
Yeah, let's take a look at how the two-way works there, Mark. If you got that clip here.
I wonder if you also take responsibility for helping elect Donald Trump in 2016. As I recall, it was because your emails were found on your wife's laptop that we had the October surprise. So, with all due respect, do you feel a responsibility for that, for shifting some votes away from Hillary into Trump?
Yeah, that's I've heard this crazy butterfly effect theory of this before. First of all, let me just say this. You could blame me. You can blame John Podesta for having, password 1 is his password on his emails that led to a lot of this. True. You can argue it was James Comey. They had my laptop for a month and a half, and they knew what was on it. And they knew that what was on it was a duplicate of something that Huma had. So they had it for months. Somehow Rudy Giuliani and people at the FBI said that there was stuff on there and said it's going to come out any day now, and it comes out 10 days before. You can blame me. You can blame Hillary for not going to Wisconsin as much as maybe she should have done. Look, you can make the argument, but all I was the tool that was used by whoever the Trump administration found that there were active efforts by the Russians to influence the election in favor of Donald Trump. But yes, I was a person who did have a laptop. I will stipulate to that.
But it wasn't nothing. I mean, he's not asking a totally crazy question.
No, it's why it was one. It was actually nothing.
So you don't know what you're going to get when you're playing around like that.
No, a guy in front of a green screen that looks like he's in Turks and Caicos asking Anthony Weiner about is the butterfly effect that you gave us Donald Trump is a pretty good question. I mean, I didn't ask him that up front because I actually have heard Weiner's answer on that like 100 times.
Yeah.
And he's right in some way too, but he's wrong in other ways. But the Russia stuff is not why Trump got elected.
Does anybody remember who Anthony Weiner? Do you know who that is, Mark?
Oh my God, yeah. Unfortunately, I remember probably too much about it because I know who Carlos Danger and Sidney Leathers is.
Who is he, real quick?
Carlos Danger was
who's Anthony Weiner?
Oh, former representative from New York City, got busted sending a picture of his wiener in his underwear to a Sidney Leathers, and it got investigated by Congress. And then comes back 5 years later and actually commits a crime or an alleged. He was convicted. He spent time in prison of sexting with an underage woman, and that's what led to the seizure of the laptop.
And so he's running for New York City Council. So basically, yes. Weiner popped up.
Weiner popped up.
He pulled out. Now he's popping up again.
Yeah, the Weiner's popped out again. Man, Mark, that's a perfect description. You remembered that exactly.
I know too much about it. Yeah,
that's amazing.
I've even seen Sidney Leathers' adult films. So I mean, I go deep.
And Mark, that is something you don't want to admit.
Well, it's all research.
That's fine. Yeah, no, that is right, because the crazy thing about Weiner is that he's 7-term congressman. He didn't finish the 7th term, but started at city council. Now he's back at the bottom, and he's running for city council in a kind of postage stamp sized district in the East Village.
Which does that include? He's going to win. Does that include? Because on your show he said he's taking a gamble that New York really isn't anti-Semitic, but You've got the new school down there. You've got NYU. I mean,
yeah,
you know, and that's the thing. When a guy says I'm gambling,
yeah,
to me, what that says is he doesn't really, you don't know what's going on. You know, I'm looking at the state of American politics now, and there's such a disconnect, right? The Democrats are wandering around. We got to get on message. It's like, no, maybe you need some new representation where you don't have to get on message or you go on a listening tour. You're from it, because the answer is the last 4 years sucked. The democratic socialism sucked.
Correct. I mean, and this is, I mean, they think that AOC is the answer. They're wrong about that. And by the way, she's been around for a long time too. I mean, I interviewed her on the Vice show, and the day that she won, the day that she beat Joe Crowley. And if they think that she's a young, fresh voice, they're wrong about that too. No, I mean, the party comes off of 4 years of the most absurd. I mean, the fact of the matter is that people remember at the end of the Biden campaign, this is the thing that you have to go back and watch because it drives you fucking crazy to see on MSNBC. And people like Joe Scarborough and Mike Barnacle and these people saying, you know, I saw him. He's spry. He could outrun us. He's the Jesse Owens of the Democratic Party. He's a sprinter. And it's like, are you guys fucking kidding me? And beyond that, like people saying that he should be on Mount Rushmore, if they should add another space for how great Joe Biden's been. And then you look at the record and you're like, wait, what did we get in that 4 years besides massive inflation and just general discontent and horrible COVID policies? This is the key to everything that nobody wants to talk about anymore. And I understand why people don't want to talk about it anymore, because it was awful and traumatic. But the COVID policies of the past administration and the Democratic Party, that is going to consign them to the trash heap of history for at least a decade. I mean, try to think, Charlie, right now, of who in the Democratic Party is offering any fresh ideas at all. I mean, the fact that the Republican Party became the party of the working class was something they should have done a long time ago, but they were inching towards it. It was sort of the Pat Buchanan types in the early 90s that were a little populist. Like, look, globalization is just a fact of life, but it's going to have losers, and you have to address that. And those people are your natural constituency. And what are you doing? And, you know, I'm not the biggest Donald Trump fan, but I think that he is a master politician when it comes to that particular issue. You know, I was in your city. I was in Detroit for a Trump rally when he did the union rally that wasn't much of a union rally, to be honest, in Detroit. And it's like, just talking to people there, it's like they have no relationship to the Democratic Party. It's not like the FDR party. You know, the working man's party, the forgotten man, as the Democrats and FDR said in the 1930s, it just doesn't exist anymore. And so you see these people, it's like, you know, no disrespect to Anthony Weiner, but, you know, these people are addicted to politics. Yeah. You get caught and then you come back and then you're doing the exact same thing. You get caught again, you go to jail for 18 months, for Christ's sake. And then you come back. It's like, no, this addiction to wanting to be, I mean, there's always something off about somebody who wants to be in Congress. It's a very low paying job. It's about power and narcissism, to be honest. I mean, again, no disrespect to Weiner. It's everybody who does that. Imagine the type of person who says, I want to be president. It's Donald Trump in a way. I mean, you get that with Donald Trump. I mean, he's a proud narcissist, but, you know, these people who pretend that they're, you know, out there for the working man are about 99% of the time full of shit.
Because, well, first of all, to finish up with the Democrats searching for something to talk to us about.
Yeah.
I'm all for Doge. Okay, you're talking to a former Democrat here. You know, like, I never moved. And the left went so far left, I see him coming from the right, you know?
Correct.
I'm for Doge. I'm for reciprocal tariffs. I understand economics. I'm not looking for just abusive tariffs, but let's get some of our companies back. Right? When you're sending Apple to China or GM to Mexico or Canada, those are actually American jobs. Those were our jobs. And I just don't think the structure is correct and something needs to be done about it. But then I look at the Republicans, party of the working man. Is the leadership the party of the working man? Is Ted Cruz a working guy? His wife is a managing partner at Goldman Sachs. If you look at the cool kids in the media surrounding him, just, you know, like Tucker Carlson or Elon Musk or Jesse Waters or Kid Rock, all these guys grew up rich. So I don't know what exactly they have in common with me, or what this new party is supposed to be all about. I don't think it holds together.
No, Tucker,
because of the leadership.
Tucker's an interesting one. I mean, I've known him.
I knew him when he drank.
Yeah, well, that's actually before me. Yeah. I didn't know him when he drank, but it's funny. I mean, they're cutting Voice of America, fine, but remember, Tucker's father ran Voice of America. His mother was the heir to the Swanson frozen dinner fortune. I mean, these are not people who are particularly working class, and that's fine, provided I mean, there's a book about FDR, and the name of the book, I think it's H.W. Brand's book, called "A Traitor to His Class." You can be a traitor to your class and say, look, I want to be there for the working people who are getting screwed. That's fine. I think that a lot of these people, not Tucker in particular, but a lot of them, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. I mean, fucking Marco Rubio is now MAGA. If Donald Trump hadn't won, Marco Rubio wouldn't be MAGA. These people have no core principles at all. If it means that you talk about the working class to get votes, then let's do it. And you see that. I mean, people have shifted their politics, particularly in the Republican Party. So when you see somebody that is pretty principled, and there's a couple of them, that I can think of. I mean, not a ton, that you say, oh, that's great. But these guys are shifting constantly towards the kind of Trump position and the MAGA position on kind of class, which, I think is refreshing, because race was the thing that the Democrats were obsessed with. Class is the thing that people should be obsessed with, because that transcends race. I mean, I've worked at so many organizations, and Charlie, I'm sure you have too, that as a rainbow, black people, white people, Hispanic people, and they all fucking went to Yale. That is not diversity. That is rich people with slightly different hues of skin color. And that's what we got for so long with Democrats. And, the shift, as you point out, from the left, it is very, very smart for Republicans to point out things that aren't issues that many people actually confront, like trans people in sports. It's an 80-20 issue. That's the dream of political people, to get an 80-20 issue. 80% are on the side of Republicans. So you see Gavin Newsom shifting on this. He's like, yeah, no, we shouldn't have trans people, biological. They shouldn't be playing in their own. This is because a culture war issue is unnecessary for the good of the American people, the average voter, but it does signal that we're no longer playing those bullshit games the Democrats have played in the kind of, if you want to call it wokeness or identity politics. That stuff just failed. And it took the election of Donald Trump and so many, the fact that Hispanics moved so far. And I did a piece for Vice about this, and everyone was kind of rolling their eyes about it. And I went down to Starr County in Texas, on the border in the Rio Grande Valley, the most Hispanic county in America. It's like literally 99% Hispanic. There's like 3 white guys that got lost and, happened to end up there. And it was the most MAGA place I've ever been, because they looked at me like, why do you think I want immigrants traipsing through my backyard who just crossed the border, which is a mile away? Because I'm Hispanic? I don't want that? Like, you think I'm okay with that? No, I'm not okay with that. And it went from the county, Hillary Clinton won it by like a 40-point margin. Biden won it by like a 2-point margin. And Trump now, I think, won it by 10 or 20 points. It's some enormous shift. What does that tell you? It means that, to me, that if you're looking at the American voter, particularly working class American voters, through the prism of race and through the prism of your own university identity politics, the fact that you're like in the Latinx studies departments, these people don't give a fuck about that. They've never said the word Latinx. They don't care about any of this shit. And Republicans figured that out. And Democrats have to figure it out themselves.
Let me help my Democratic friends here with the trans issue. You want to dig yourself out of this. Elizabeth Warren says it's a violence against transgender people is a white supremacy issue. Okay. Yeah. If you look at it and you do any studying and you hit the streets, you'll know that the majority of violence perpetrated against trans people are black people. And it's usually on the streets, and it's in places where it's the sex trade. It's 6th and Woodward right here, right? I did a story of, it's a very particular place. I did a story, went out, talked to the ladies, had a drink with them, et cetera, et cetera. Next week, bullet in somebody's head. The problem is that little enclave within Detroit is called Highland Park. They don't have enough cops. In fact, they had to ship the murder case off to the state police because they don't have any homicide detectives. So if you want to come back, and I'm for everybody, try to love everybody. The issue with violence against trans people, we need some more cops to protect them. We need patrolmen. We need homicide detectives. That's what we need. We don't need dudes in locker rooms. In fact, any terrific female athlete tries to compete against men. You know, you've had a few that, I want to go pro and I want to be drafted by the NBA. No one's broken through yet, but that's where you're trying to go. So if you're a trans woman, why wouldn't you compete with men? I don't understand that. I don't understand it at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I'm not going to die on that hill. Mm-hmm. People here are dying in the streets. That's what we got to deal with.
Well, I'll tell you the one thing that Wiener clearly understands as somebody running for city council is that we need more cops in New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, I ride the subway every day. It's an insane asylum. I mean, this is the result of deinstitutionalization. And there are people, I mean, the Daniel Penny thing was the least surprising thing to any person who rides a subway in New York. And if people don't remember that story, it was a guy who was in, the guy Jordan Neely was his name, was in the car, who was very, very sweetly described by all the newspapers as a Michael Jackson impersonator. It's like, well, in fact, he was a mentally ill, violent, homeless person and threatened to kill everyone in the car. Daniel Penny, former Marine, lives in Long Island, where I am now. And he choked the guy out and the guy died. And I think the guy had drugs in the system, the rest of it. But that is the day-to-day experience of people that isn't kind of in statistics. So I have people all, that write into the podcast and they say, well, that's not true. The subway is safer. It's like, dude, the feeling of menace in the city, in New York City, on the subway is not a statistic. You don't call the cops when you feel uncomfortable on the subway, when someone's screaming at the top of the lungs and they get off. That's never reflected in statistics. That kind of feeling, and the response that people want is they want more cops. They've always wanted more cops.
Yeah.
And the big bullshit thing that has been propagated by people who have obvious political agendas is, I'll give you one example, the crack and powder cocaine disparity in sentencing. That was bad. We shouldn't have done that. That was terrible. But you know what? That was actually pushed by Charlie Rangel in the Congressional Black Caucus because they went out and said, look, probably this is during the Reagan administration, this is an epidemic that is ravaging the black community. And you guys don't care. Do something about it. Make the penalties harsher. Look this up. It is absolutely true.
Yes.
And there's a good book about this called The Black Silent Majority that points out in the 70s and 80s when crime was rampant in places like Detroit, in places like New York City, in places like Cleveland, and it was especially hitting black neighborhoods, there were local black politicians and community leaders that said, give us more cops. We want to be surveilled and we want cops in the street more than we have them now because we have crack and we have gang problems. And that kind of stuff is like, you think that, who calls the police? The New York police don't do like proactive policing anymore. They respond to calls. Who calls police? What neighborhoods? Why the cops in those neighborhoods? Because the people in those neighborhoods call them. Because, don't be condescending, people. The average, like, middle-aged, elderly, even young black person in the neighborhood, they want cops there when there's people fucking around. And that is something that Democrats didn't understand. And I think the biggest own goal, after a series of so many fucking own goals, was after George Floyd and the defund the police stuff, fewer police officers. Sure.
We're talking.
The idea is crazy to me.
We're talking with Michael Moynihan. He has a new program, the Moynihan Report. Where do they find that, Michael?
On Two Way, and it's the number 2 and Way on YouTube. It's on the Two Way channel. And just Google the Moynihan Report; it'll come up too.
There you
It'll
go.
Also, the 1965 Moynihan Report by Daniel Patrick Moynihan will also come up, but not that one. So,
what a nerd, Mark! You had a question.
Well, I just wanted to follow it up on the whole idea, Michael, of more policing, and I still don't understand. There was an incident last September. I think his name was Darren Mickles. And the response by that, do you know the story of Darren?
I might know it. I don't remember the name offhand.
He jumped the turnstile for the subway, and then the police went after him, and he ended up holding up a knife, and they told him to drop it multiple times, and the police even admit that maybe these guys were a little aggressive, but he went at him. Nobody died, but he was shot at. And the response to it from the politicians in New York City have been, they shot him over jumping a turnstile, and they're just yada yada yadaing the whole middle part out. And I wonder, like, why would a city representative, a Democrat, do that? Why not say exactly what happened and admit that it's not perfect?
The New York City Council and most politicians and political leaders in New York have, as Charlie pointed out, shifted so far to the left that it's unrecognizable to the average person, because to live in New York City now, you have to be rich and university educated, and you can't get an apartment in the roughest neighborhood for under $1 million if you're trying to buy something. So the kind of political leadership is preaching to a crowd of people that also went to Skidmore College and Stanford and Bucknell, and like these people that already spent $100,000 to go to school. It's a very particular type of political being. I mean, but that's the thing. I mean, I was in Kenosha right when those riots happened, and this is a great, by the way, disconnect between Republicans and Democrats. Donald Trump came, and this is 2020. Before the election, he came and he visited with these immigrants who had their businesses burned down in the rioting. Joe Biden came and visited with the family of the man, Jacob Blake, I think was his name. Jacob Blake, was that his name?
I think so.
That was shot by the police. What did we find out very quickly about Jacob Blake? And it was in the video that you see. He had a knife. He was holding a knife to the police. And he was also violating a restraining order for committing sexual assault against his either ex-wife or ex-girlfriend. Joe Biden went and visited him. And that was this is the thing, like that stuff, to the exact same point that you were making. It was never mentioned that Jacob Blake, or it took a while to be mentioned, that the guy was armed. And that, because the narrative is what was important. The narrative was the police are there to, be an occupying force and oppress people in their own neighborhoods. And that was particularly the narrative after George Floyd. And look, I mean, so many cops do so many bad things. I'm not saying blanket, we have to defend the cops just because, my last name's Moynihan and I have cops in the family, or had cops in the family in the past. It's just like, it became this narrative that anything that the police did. And the shocking thing about that story is that the one that you just told is that anyone confronted anyone hopping a turnstile. This is the opposite of broken windows policing. When I moved to New York in the Giuliani era, is that I knew people that they would try to slip through the turnstile, go to jail, they'd spend the night in the Tombs downtown. Now, I never see anyone at my subway stop ever pay for the subway. It's just a total breakdown in order in that way. No one pays.
And no one,
it's incredible.
No one, the both sidisms of it, let's take it back to journalism. It's either the policing, crime's out of control, or cops are devils, right? Mm-hmm. As the media breaks down the nuanced, tell me the story, tell me about police contracts and why we can't get rid of the bad cops and how most of them aren't bad. That's gone, and it's defaulted. The old, Vice stuff. It's now just defaulted to podcasts, and everybody's sniffing each other's ass, and we're all talking about the same thing. And that's not, I guess it is. It's the media, but it's not journalism, right? The tweeting is not journalism. Podcasting is not journalism. And what's left of the mainstream, I think, is about ready to crumble, and that we have to pick it up on these alternative forms, guys that were trained to do it. Because now you got RFK Jr. talking about he wants to ban pharmaceutical companies from advertising. Now, to put this in perspective, Big Pharma in the United States spends about $30 billion a year. That is more than the gross domestic product of Bosnia. So what happens is Big Pharma is buying off the media. Like, you're not going to, when I went to see Roger Ailes to do my show, The Americans, for Fox, he said to me on the way out, he goes, okay, I'm going to let you do it, but you're not going to write about our advertisers, or you're not going to do pieces on them. What he was saying is, you're not touching Big Pharma. So if you take this revenue stream away, what happens to Fox or CNN or MSNBC or local news, for that matter?
It's a good question, because the thing about journalism, as you know, is, Charlie, podcasts are a type of journalism, but it's not reporting. And you notice that everybody who's pontificating on podcasts about, the working class have never met a working class person. I mean, they don't. I mean, the closest they get is maybe the person that comes to clean their apartment or something. But yeah, I mean, I think the difference now is that it's almost impossible to make money in journalism in a traditional way. I mean, as you know, newspapers were the most profitable things in America. If you own a newspaper, you were a very, very rich and powerful person. It's the Charles Foster Kane, owned a newspaper. Remember that this is what you would have as the example of somebody that was really rich. The McCormick family who owned the Chicago Tribune, et cetera. I mean, this is no longer the case. So, I mean, the incentives are totally fucked up now in the sense that, like, I always point out that, when I worked at the Daily Beast for a while, and that was the first time I noticed it, was that, I worked for Tina Brown, and I love Tina, and she's brilliant at magazines. And you saw this shift. I mean, they had just bought Newsweek. It's kind of last dying gasp of old magazine world. When you still had people on the payroll who had like magazine salaries, like old magazine salaries and got paid a lot. But you saw this thing where the internet was now the most important thing. And that news cycle never ended. I mean, Charlie, when you filed a story and you were in Detroit, you'd go to the bar afterwards and you'd sit there drinking and you filed your shit and you would come and this day was, that stopped. Like,
and you're waiting, and you're waiting for the paper to hit the streets.
Yeah, like, so and that's the story comes out. And like, I mean, even going back so far as like we had evening editions and morning editions of papers, and that just disappeared. And the problem was the advertising disappeared, which is all the money came from, and that disappeared because of Craigslist and Facebook and all this stuff. And so you have ad revenue going down, 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 and the demand for content going up, 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 because the news cycle never ends. You're filing stories at 7:00 and they're going online at 7:30. You're filing stories at 10:00 and they're going on at 10:30. I mean, something is happening. You got to get people to do it. Who do you get to do it? You can't pay them because you don't have any money. Mm-hmm. So you get these kids who are 20 years old, 23 years old, just out of college. They don't know anything. They make endless mistakes, and they're very ideological. And that was the thing that I noticed with Vice. Everyone became super ideological, and it became like a college seminar on race, class, gender.
Wait, what happened? What happened to Vice? Because let's just back up here for a second. Yeah. It starts in Montreal. It's a hipster guy thing. Yeah. It figured out the internet first. Yeah, right. Figured out YouTube,
video in particular. Yeah,
figured out video. It's doing hip shit, cannibal. It nailed. It was there for me. I was a national columnist for about a year there. You were what, the managing editor?
I was the managing editor of the magazine, and then I was one of the hosts. Yeah.
So
I did both.
What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
that was the model, dude. When it was valued at $5 billion, and you went to Williamsburg, you went out front there. It was a fucking scene. I mean,
enormous.
Every filmmaker in the world, every writer, every book, everybody I ever knew in New York that had some national prominence was hanging out in front there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now,
I mean, Charlie, when we did the show in Detroit, I mean, there's two things about that. It's actually a good example. Because what you're saying, every filmmaker's hanging out there, all the cool people. That show,
I didn't say cool. A lot of assholes, man. Self-important assholes.
There were
no offense.
A ton of those. But that show was two things. One was that Spike Jonze was involved in it, which is amazing. And sitting in meetings with Spike Jonze, who's an incredible filmmaker, smart, interesting, funny guy, and it was sponsored. And that was how you did it, right? That was sponsored content. And I have to say that that show was sponsored by Bank of America, weirdly. And the thing about it was that I said this at the beginning, and this is true. I have all the emails to prove this. They never interfered because they knew it would look bad. They wanted to get with the kids, right? But they didn't want to ever seem like they were thumbing the scale. So it was actually kind of cool that we're taking all their money and just setting it on fire, right? Yeah, right. We're spending tons of their fucking money, and we just did whatever we wanted.
In the newsroom, a bar on wheels in the newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially what it was, and we just traveled around the country because we want to spend their money. But the thing is, there was like three categories. There's just straight editorial stuff. There was sponsored content, which somebody would just pay to be the sponsor, like Chesterfield Cigarettes is sponsoring a TV show in the 50s or 60s.
That's my brand.
And then there was branded content, which was stuff that you never saw, which was Mini Cooper wanted you to do a series for them that they would put out on their own website, and it didn't have Vice's imprimatur on it, but it was just like Vice did it and it looked cool and they had the cool camera guys and an exotic location. So there was like a bunch of layers of making money. And that was like really successful for a while until everybody figured out how to do it. And also I think the real thing, and I was the only person who actually wrote about this because the ideology of so many of the people there didn't want to accept this, but it became, and again, for lack of a better word, it became like painfully woke and it became scolding. It was like cool and interesting and funny. And I have to say this, and this is a controversial thing to say, but it was started by Gavin McInnes. And I mean,
we had him on the program, dude. He walked off when we showed him shoving a dildo up his ass.
Oh, that seems about right. Yeah.
And he goes, "It's a joke." And I'm like, "It's a joke. Hey, Red, hand me the number 2 pencil. Shove it up my ass. See if I laugh." It was funny.
But Gavin, you know, for all of Gavin's many, many, many faults, he set the tone of it. It was really funny and really irreverent. And everyone acknowledges, whether they want to or not, that Gavin really set the voice of it. And Gavin is a funny dude.
The reason you say that is for people that don't know, he's also the founder of the Proud Boys.
Proud Boys, yeah.
So this ultra hip, sleek, lower Manhattan, cool shit. One of the founders leaves and founds the Proud Boys. Just it's odd. It's the turn of the century.
He always
was crazy.
had that politics, which is one of the reasons he was forced out. But it's always a bit of a white nationalist there. So
that's when it flips, right?
Yeah. Well, it's around that time they remain for a while, but then it becomes just the opposite of that. And it is like nobody wants to come home from work and be yelled at by their TV about like, you have white privilege or whatever. That's just not good television. And I think that's pretty obvious to anyone. And I think all of that stuff combined just made it like, it felt like an activist organization, much less of a journalistic organization or entertainment organization. I mean, it didn't have to inform you. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that wasn't that super informative and it was probably misinforming you in some ways. Like you just mentioned the cannibal thing, which was the piece in Liberia. I mean, that's like, David Carr from the New York Times was like, this is the, just a travesty of journalism, whatever. It's like, yeah, but it was fun to watch and funny. Yeah. And then Vice tried to get more serious. And then when you get more serious, you hire kids from fucking journalism school and they're the most miserable people on the planet.
I mean, where's it going? Because like, again, it can be interesting and fun, but it's got to be accurate. And
correct.
And who's doing that? And
Nobody.
So this shit's not going to, well, I write a weekly column at the Michigan Enjoyer. Just go to Michigan Enjoyer, just Google it. And, I want to thank the editor there because I'm like, hey, you know what I want to do for my column this week? Suicide. Mm-hmm. And why? Because I got a letter and it was odd. It was sad, okay? Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, I need to think about this. And then I start going through all the academic journals, start reading the reports. And I'm like, this is a real issue, right? This is journalism, and it needs to be talked about. It's an epidemic amongst middle-aged men, and they went for it. But I don't want to write an academic paper or like white guys deserve what they're getting or whatever. Ken Beck's over here, and we were really working hard to make something beautiful. That said something, that it is journalism, and I'm going to know all the stuff and strip it out and just give it to you raw. I don't know if anybody wants to read the academic journals anymore.
No. I mean, that's our job in a way, right? I mean, you're a journalist.
That's what I'm saying, brother.
Yeah. Somebody sends you a letter and it was the thing at the top of the show is horrible and depressing and, and moving. And your job, obviously, you get that letter is to convey that, but then put the meat on the bones and say, this is actually a real issue. And despair is a real issue. Is it because of people's economic situations? Is it because of, outsourcing or whatever you want to say? I mean, there's a million ways of looking into it. But yeah, that is what journalism is. It's not just going out in the street. It's not just talking to people in bars, talking to people at their place of work. I had a funny thing, and you'll appreciate this. I was out at a factory in, I can't remember where it was, maybe it was in Kentucky. We went to the bar afterwards. We'd finished shooting, and I had a producer there with me who is just a Brooklyn guy. And we walked out of the bar after having like 700 beers. And he looked at me, I swear to God, and he said, wow, it's crazy. Like, that place is more diverse than any of the bars that I go into in Brooklyn. And I was like, yeah, there's people from the factory floor, black and Hispanic and like immigrants and like white guys and they're all just drinking and having, like, they all share the same life. And they don't do that in Brooklyn. And that's just not like, they can't imagine this stuff. And it's all through the prism of some very particular ideology. But to your point, it's like reporting is one thing, but aggregating material that is, other people don't have the time or the interest to do, like go to the academic journals. And what does all this stuff mean? We're translators too. I mean, that's what we have to do, is translate stuff that might be a little boring for other people. I don't think above people's pay grade. I'm saying we're smarter, or, people are dumber. I don't think that at all. I think it's just the job is like, you have to go through and sift through this stuff and say, okay, what is actually happening? Like, I remember telling people in the George Floyd stuff, there was this really interesting poll, and this tells you a lot, we asked people, how many unarmed black men do you think are killed by the police every year? And there were like 20-30% of people said like over 1,000. I mean, the number is like 16. And it was like that year was like 18 or 16 or something. There's a database of this stuff. And even when you break that down, a lot of the officers were black themselves. The people mistake a cell phone for a gun. It wasn't just like gunning people down the streets. Yeah. But like somebody's got to go through that material and say, guys, I know what the general media coverage is making you think, but the actual truth of this is a little more complicated. And that's what your job as a sort of journalistic translator is. Half the time, it's not just reporting, although that is obviously really important. And I know that's what you've spent your life doing, is like just going out and talking to people, which is the most fun part of the job. Absolutely. I don't know why people do it. It's fucking great.
It takes a lot of, when we talk about crime statistics and they're going down, it takes some time to like be in a car with a cop, show up to a homicide scene, write the stories, right? And start building. Then you start getting familiar with crime statistics. Then you realize the FBI does 2 surveys. One, the cops, give me your data, and it talks to people that were victimized. And they used to be more people were victimized than the cops were telling you, of course. Cops want to look good, but they tracked each other. They were parallel, it's like off 10%, 15, 20%. In the last 4 years, they started diverging, right? So the FBI quietly readjusts its own crime statistics. It didn't tell anybody, but in my city, I found that in the last 10 years of this mayor, 300 bodies are missing from the homicide count. You go to the morgue. They're the ones that declare cause of death. Where are these 300 bodies? So when the mayor's giving his rosy state of the city last night, everybody just buys it. I'm like, you can't just buy it. It's not an accurate portrayal. And it's just snowing everybody. And it's the woke crowd out of college. It really is.
I did a story for Vice a long time ago where I went to Venezuela and where Caracas, when Chavez was still alive, and it was like the murder capital of the world at the time. And this is what governments do, and this is what journalists are needed for, not my journalism, but the journalists in Venezuela, because we hung out with them, is they stopped releasing the figures of murders because it was like globally very bad for them. They had this big socialist revolution. It was supposed to be great, and everyone's being killed in the street. So we went out with the cops and went to like a bunch of homicide scenes, and the number in a day was absolutely stunning. But then we went out with the journalists, and they weren't giving out the figures. So what did the journalists do? They went to the morgue, and they hung out there, and they counted the bodies as they came in, and they created their own statistics, because obviously, whether it's the mayor of Detroit or the dictator of Venezuela, they don't want you to know these things. And that's the kind of value of journalism in that sense. And you're seeing these guys are getting paid absolutely nothing. They're getting persecuted by the government, and they're camped out in front of a single morgue in Caracas, counting the dead bodies because no one will put them in a statistic because it makes them look bad.
And why is it important? Why is it important to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know for a million reasons, but it's I think that people also get hung up on statistics too, in the sense that, the thing in New York City when you're talking about crime going down, and that's true in certain categories, not true in others, but like the general unease that you felt when you're in like Midtown in front of the Roosevelt Hotel that was kind of warehousing migrants.
Yeah.
Or you're in Queens, which has become, certain parts of Queens with these kind of migrant, street vendors and prostitution. The New York Post was doing all these stories on it. That sense of unease is really hard to capture in a statistic. And to say that like all the crazy people on the subway, all that kind of just general feeling of menace when someone looks at the numbers and they tell you from their sort of home in Atherton, California, that you're imagining it because the statistics don't tell you. That's another the other end of it. They matter to track, exactly how good a government is operating, if they are actually, putting money and effort into policing. But then again, there's all those things that people think it tracks everything, but it doesn't. I mean, you never call the police when someone is screaming at the top of the lungs on your subway car. Nobody does that. So that's just like, that's not, where is that being, sort of put in any statistic? You can't. I mean, you can't do that.
I mean, the job, dude, is to hold up a mirror to society, right? And in all ways. And what's one thing that's dying that I miss is feature stories. I like to, when I was at the Times, I always said, I want to be the Hey George guy. The Hey George guy is couple sitting down to breakfast and Mildred is looking at a feature story. She says, "Hey George, did you see this? I once got a message on my machine and I had written about opening day striped bass fishing in Jamaica Bay. There's still trappers and hunters out in the water right off of JFK airport. It's amazing." And it was a guy who goes, "Hey, Charlie, you don't know me, but I clipped the story you wrote about opening day for the stripers, and I put it in my drawer. And whenever I'm feeling down, Charlie, I like to take that out and and read that. And I just want to let you know that I took that out of the drawer today. Have a good day."
That's great.
I'll never ever forget it.
Yeah.
So it's like a record of who we are, what's going on, holding the powerful to account. It's not really supposed to be about your prestige. If you want prestige, try another career. And I don't know if there's a career in this anymore, but I don't know what else to do, man. So a couple guys like us, we just find ourselves, let's see if we can take some of the old stuff, create the new stuff, and push it all forward. Because it is a hell of a time.
I think that maybe you've experienced this too, but, part of the career now, you have to, just be depressed and accept that you're not going to be able to, run around the world and do the shit that you did in the past.
But we did.
Yeah, we did. That was fun. I mean, it was incredible. But the personal connection stuff is what we do now. Is what I do now anyway. Is that the podcast that I do regularly, the Fifth Column, we have an enormous listener base, and we've had people that met each other and got married through it. They have their own text chains. They come to live shows that we do, and that kind of stuff where people said, and particularly during the pandemic, the number of emails that people said, I feel like I know you guys. I'm like locked in the middle of nowhere. I can't interact with anyone. And I listen to you guys shooting the shit. And it's like, it became a very personal thing that the journalism went from going out on the road all the time to people writing you about their problems. And it was
you're dear fucking Abby meaningful. Now. You're dear Abby.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I didn't sign up for it, but it's just
I'm writing about my dead buddy in a trash can, and you're doing Dear Abby. Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, that's it. It's a Dear Abby thing, and it's a very personal thing. And people they get to know you in that way. The podcast, that's the difference. I mean, it's not reporting in the sense that you used to do it, but I think it's valuable in the sense that people really get something out of it that I didn't expect.
Okay,
I
so
really didn't expect it at all.
You know this in the new world. When I post this bitch, I don't want it looking like an hour plus, and people no fucking way. So we're getting out of here before we hit the hour mark. Let's do that. I want to look at my daughter right there and say, Claude, this guy is the OG. When you're looking at TikTok and YouTube and the shorts, right? This was the first generation to do it. This guy, and he's still here. He's still youngish.
Trying.
He's the OG. It's Michael Moynihan. Check out the Moynihan Report, the Fifth Column. You write stuff for the Free Press, don't you?
Yeah, occasionally, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. The OG, man. Thanks for being on, brother. It was great.
Thank you, Charlie. Good to see you, man.
And look me up next time you're in Detroit and bring some of those Xanax.
Don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Wink. See you, brother.
Bye, man.